here in Pastor Patrick Anthony's lovely little office. I'm Daniel. We're about to embark upon our 5th week of Blackadder Society Fall 2025 semester, and we are going to start our time off this Thursday looking and pondering on Proverbs chapter 2, understanding where the wisdom of God comes from and what the benefits are to us. We hope to delve into that a little bit more and hope to focus on understanding those benefits and the incentive that the Lord holds out to us to seek His wisdom. And that all, of course, relates to Job, who is a prominent figure in the Old Testament. And Pastor Anthony is going to take us to chapter 1, where we get the curtains rolled back on the heavenly courtroom. Can you tell us a little bit about what this picture is? Is this really heaven that we're looking at, or is it some sort of allegorical symbolism?
My conviction is that it's heaven, and it's on its face. What it says is what's actually happening. And Satan, who was an angel in heaven, apparently in the Old Testament, still had access to God's throne to come and accuse the saints, and that's what he does. It's this scene where it kind of gets the narrative going in Job, where Satan shows up and basically accuses Job of only following God because God has showered His blessings on him, which is a legitimate, I think. So there are people who would only follow God simply because of the blessings, and Satan calls into question Job's character and suggests that were God to take away those blessings, that Job would actually curse God, and so God grants His permission for Satan to go and to take away the blessings, but just not to harm him, which of course later physical harm is layered on top of it, but that's not what's happening in our passage. And then at the end of the passage we see Satan leaving and going to do just that.
What really stands out to you in terms of maybe surprising shock value from that passage?
Well, I think, objectively speaking, the most shocking thing that happens there is that God allows it. That God says, "All right, go for it," right? Because we just found out, in verses 1 through 5, that Job is blameless, and he's this person we ought to strive to be. He's making sacrifices on behalf of his own children, just in case they might have, sinned. And
right, yeah, it really shows us. Here's this perfect man. He's described as being blameless, righteous, and at least in God's eyes,
yeah,
right? Like from what we know to be imputed righteousness,
right?
But it doesn't. It really just the warfare that's going on,
yeah,
right? Behind the scenes,
yeah.
I think it's Paul that talks about we fight not against flesh and blood, but
right,
principalities and powers of darkness, and this is the case point for what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
We kind of forget in our everyday activity.
Right. Yeah, we get little peeks of it through the scriptures, like in Daniel 10, where there's another one that always just blows my mind, where, the archangel Michael shows up, and he shows up like, all right, Daniel, I've just been 20-something days battling the prince of the air of Persia. You're just like, what? Why would you spend 3 weeks battling the prince? It's like, yeah, you do get to see these little windows of that spiritual warfare, and it's something I think that, especially in our technology, the world we live in has really we've sort of conquered the physical universe. It feels like, and kind of separates us from these realities. So we need a little bit of a wake up call.
Right. And would you say it describes the spiritual battle as in a courtroom? That's where the battle's happening. It's about charges being laid, and the defenses are having to be made, and rebuttals. And
that's a great question. Yeah, because Satan is the accuser, right? And so he would be the prosecuting attorney, And the truth is, there's he has a lot of charges that he could lay against us, and even Job, right, to be blessed was a gift of God with all the material possessions he had, the family he had, all these wonderful things, and it wouldn't be unlike a human being to have all those things taken away and to curse God. And yet, because Job was in Christ through faith, was covered in the robes of Christ's righteousness, was justified. He was declared innocent by God, and that innocence proved itself in the fruits of faith and being able to trust in God. And I really appreciated depending on when we're filming this versus, I want to say last week, but I think when this gets shown, it'll be 2 weeks ago. Pastor David from Christ Community Church just talked about Job got to the breaking point of questioning God, to the point where you're just like, well, Job, are you sure you should have said that? Mm-hmm. And I appreciated him saying that, because when you are reading through Job, you're like, whoa, Job, but the one thing Job never did was stop trusting God, right? And in that trust, in that faith, he receives this righteousness that was impenetrable. So yeah, I would say it's a courtroom, yeah, especially in that scene. You see that very vividly.
Yeah, I was going to say is in terms of the timeline, what is this scene in heaven? Something that's ongoing, continuing today? Is that unique to just Job's day, long ago, or what are we? How should we look at this?
Another great question. Yeah. So I would go to Revelation 12, right, where we see Satan, also referred to as the accuser, there, and we find out that upon Christ's victory and ascension, he was thrown down. And so it does seem to be this sense where Satan had greater access, in the Old Testament, but now he's been thrown down. He cannot deceive the nations anymore. And now we have an advocate in the throne room, who's Christ the righteous one, who that's what John talks about. But we have an advocate with the Father, and as Christians, we when we sin, the accusations that we could never be forgiven are leveled at us, right? Mm-hmm. It's like in the Pilgrim's Progress, when Christians, battling, is it Apollyon or whatever? I can't, mm-hmm. It's like, what does he say? I'm forgiven, right? Mm-hmm. This I know, that I'm forgiven. And I personally, know how great a sinner I am. And were I to not have an advocate that I could count on to plead my case based on his finished work, it'd be really easy to get me off my game. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think Job knew he had an advocate, or knew of this scene?
Well, he says, I know that my Redeemer lives, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't think he knew it to the degree that we know it, right? But I think that there's a reason why when the book opens, he's offering sacrifices. And I think he knew what we're told in Hebrews, that these sacrifices don't take away sin. And again, there's some question about when Job takes place, right? Is Job, in the timeline of Scripture, does it occur, prior to, Genesis, or, in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, or does it occur sometime later? But regardless of that, there's this clear sense that you have that Job knows God, knows that a sacrifice must take place in order for his sins to be covered, mm-hmm. and he knows that he has a Redeemer. And so, yeah.
Does any part of the passage we're going to consider, how would you tie it to just the overall theme of wisdom? So we're looking at wisdom literature here in the Scriptures.
So wisdom is the thing that when you are able to live life as it really is, right? So the unwise person deals with suffering, especially, because when we suffer, I think it's wise to ask ourselves, have I sinned to bring this suffering upon myself? Or is this a test? Maybe God is just growing me, and if we determine that, hey, this is something God has brought into my life, I can know that it's something that he's ordained for my good and to make me more like Christ, and to know in wisdom that's how it works. Especially going to the end of Job, when Job's asking why, and saying like, hey, I want a chance to I want to talk to God about all this. He gets his chance, and God's essentially like, I'm God. So to me, that's wisdom is being able to rest in the sovereignty of providence of God,
right,
in spite of what's happening. And Job gives us such a powerful picture of that. And even later in chapter 1, right? Though you slay me, yet will I praise you. I mean, it's all just it's narratival wisdom, right? It's just showing us by example.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact that Satan's in heaven where God is, and God is the one controlling that with him.
Yeah.
He's the one who initiates the question. He's the one who has Satan. It really looks like Satan's far subservient, right? Which he is, but he's not a supreme being who's got a lot of power outside of what he's allowed to do by God.
Right.
And that, for me, is like, that's really comforting, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that God is sovereign, even over the works of the enemy. Can give you a certain amount of comfort and hope.
Well, he has a plan and a purpose for it, right? So when I always take, when I'm counseling with people, one of my favorite verses to go to is Genesis 50:20, which, Joseph, after Jacob dies, his brothers are sure that he's going to now seek revenge because, Jacob's gone. And, they basically come up to him and said, Dad said that you had to be nice to us, and he just tears his clothes and is like, and he says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, and to just know, that the unbelieving mind, I don't think, can wrap itself around that concept that, something that a free creature could intend for evil, God could also intend the action of that free creature for good. And then in Job, you see that principle just, on display, and it gives you great comfort, man. I don't know, because otherwise evil is just random, and it'd be so easy to get bitter about what you've lost, or so it's powerful.
Right. Yeah. It's there's a lot of different directions you can probably go.
Oh yeah.
With that short little section, hours probably of expounding upon it. But do you have without giving it all away, do you have a certain strategy you're going to take with us on Thursday?
One of the reasons I like preaching narratives is I think you can walk through the narrative, and then you can just very easily draw. We've kind of, I'm not probably not gonna say a lot different than what we talked about today, to be honest with you, because you do want to draw out that theme of God's sovereignty. You want to answer the question that's in everybody's mind about, like, why is Satan in the throne room? How often can Satan get here? What's God doing when he's allowing him to, when he's giving, those are the questions that are going to be on everybody's mind. And so you want to go through those theological things, and then you want to apply the text, to our lives of, like, hey, look, when you are accused of your sin, which these young guys, man, I was raised kind of in a, non-denominational, I prayed the prayer when I was 5. I was never discipled growing up. We didn't consistently go to church growing up, and so I remember being a kid, and when like puberty hits, almost, it's like there's this sense of, like, wow, I'm a sinner, and something's wrong with you, and and I did not, at that time, I did not have the resources to understand that, and I think for these young guys, when temptation, for us as mature Christians, a temptation pops in. We take our thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ. We know what's true. We preach the gospel to ourselves. We claim the blood of Jesus Christ, and we move on. And I don't know about you, but it took me a while to get into the habit of that. And so for these young guys, they're sorting it out. And for them to know that they that though they might be accused by the accuser, that they have an advocate. Man, to me, that's huge.
Yeah, right. And with all the chapters of Job, that message is in there.
Oh yeah,
buried in there. And if you just quickly peruse through it, you may not get there because there's so much poetry and language, as Pastor Morris talked about a couple weeks ago. But yeah, well, this is exciting. I'm excited to see what comes out of your message, and looking forward to gathering with the rest of the men this Thursday.
Yep. Me too.
For he is like a growing tree, which planted by a flowing stream, in season yields its finest fruit, its leaves are always fresh and green. In all he does, he finds